Welcome to It's Just ADHD. We're two curious ADHD coaches, and we're going deep on the how, the why, and the strategies to get through the difficult moments, and how to make the best of life with ADHD. I'm John, and I've got an adult diagnosis of ADHD.
And I'm Tara, and I have a late-in-life ADHD diagnosis and an even later autism diagnosis. We're going to be diving headfirst into the messy and often complicated research around ADHD and autism. And we're bringing you along for the journey as we break it all down and make sense of everything.
Because sometimes it's just life.
And sometimes it's just ADHD.
I have a confession to make. I'm a sinner. I sin. I don't pray. I don't go to church. Are you a sinner?
Started off as Catholic, and then I went to a Catholic school, and I came out not Catholic. So I'm in the same boat.
You've strayed. You've strayed. Yeah. No, religion never took from me. Yeah, I have. I've strayed very far. I tried a bunch of different. I did try with religion. I got into witchcraft for a little while, like palm reading, Wicca. And then I was in the South. I lived in the South for 10 years, and it was the Bible Belt. And so I had a lot of there was the church is the community there, so a lot of people go to church. And I had some friends invite me, and so I went to like a Southern Baptist church, and it was like hellfire and brimstone. It made my skin burn, which is either because I'm like such a sinner that being in church makes my skin burn. Maybe I'm a vampire. I don't know. Or maybe it has something to do with like anxiety or just not feeling welcome in that place as somebody who is neurodivergent, who didn't know I was neurodivergent, in a community where I have a lot of like structure and expectations pushed on me. Yeah, that didn't last.
That's fair. And I'll say you are not alone. Today we have a really interesting topic. I feel like you wouldn't generally expect religion and ADHD or religion and autism to show up in the same line of like the header of a research study. But there's actually some very fascinating studies about how neurodivergence impacts your religious or non-religious experiences, and how religion impacts your neurodivergence the other way around. And so we wanted to share some of those with you today, because I was reading through some of these, and it's just absolutely fascinating. So I think this one's going to be a two-parter. Today, we're going to be focused more on religion and ADHD and just kind of the general reasons why someone may or may not be terribly religious if they're neurodivergent. And then next episode is going to be more focused on autism and some studies about autism and religion. And just wanted to do a disclaimer here. So before we begin, I just want to remind you that this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. It is not intended to replace professional medical care. We are not doctors. We don't claim to be. We are just a couple of nerds who find this information and this research really fascinating, and we want to discuss it. But please keep your medical decisions between you and your doctor and keep us out of it. All right, let's begin. Obviously, this is a neurodivergence podcast. A lot of listeners are going to have rejection sensitivity. And so I just want to call out here, like, we are not trying to say that like any one religion is better than another. We're not trying to make you feel ashamed if you are or are not religious, or say that there's any way that's right or wrong. This is more of like an academic discussion about just the interplay between religion and neurodivergence. And if at any point you are feeling that twinge of rejection sensitivity, like, please know that's not what we're thinking. That's not what we're feeling about you. And I hope that you know that. We don't want anybody to walk away feeling bad after they listen to our podcast.
Yeah, great call out. Rejection sensitivity is probably why my skin was burning in church. But having said that, I think like because I lived in the South for about a decade, I did have a lot of friends that were in the religious community, and that made me want to explore religion. I was curious, so I actually like. I think the academic approach is great for neurodivergence because I feel like that's sort of how we like see the world sometimes, right? It's like trying to understand the reasoning behind things, unpacking things, getting into that like maybe some of like the lore that's there, or some of like why is it this way and where do we fit into things. So yeah, all that is to say, like, we're not saying religion is necessarily bad or anything wrong with that. I actually have a lot of respect for people that practice religion in a respectful way. I think that in cases where like there is harm, it's often at like the organizational level and rarely at the personal. But I do have a lot of opinions about it because, as I mentioned before, I am a sinner. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about, you know, some of the negative experiences that we had, some of like the positives to religion. I think there's a lot to unpack here. I was surprised that you found an article about this that kind of goes into some of these depths and takes this sort of like academic lens here.
Yeah, so let's talk about it. So this was really fascinating. So they did a study looking at the Jewish population with people of sort of varying intensities of Judaism, like everything from people who are, you know, more casual with their faith, all the way to like ultra Orthodox Jewish people. And they wanted to understand that interplay that we were talking about. So ADHD has obviously some negative impacts. And they talk about this. It has emotional distress, difficulties with like your social life. And they use language, antisocial behavior, delinquency, crime, and incarceration. Little bit harsh language, but you know, we do know that this is objectively true. We had talked about this in one of our other podcast episodes about the benefits of ADHD medication. Like objectively, it does bring down crime rates and incarceration rates and stuff like that. So that is the thing that we know is true. In general, being religious tends to buffer against some of those impacts. Like you are less likely to have delinquent behavior, less likely to not be part of a community, generally higher well-being. And they say this is true in both Western and non-Western cultural contexts. So the answer that they wanted to figure out is basically, can religion buffer against some of the negative outcomes of ADHD if you are a religious person with ADHD? Like, would it help to kind of dampen some of those negative impacts of ADHD?
So that's super interesting, right? It sounds like what they're saying about religion and even like some of the crime and things like that have to do with the community aspect, right? Because when you're part of a community, you can feel support. You have people to turn to. So there are those like positive things about religion. It also sounds like there might be a little bit of a structure in place there with some of that community stuff that might be beneficial for people with ADHD. Is that what some of it was finding?
That's exactly what they were trying to find out.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say that's necessarily what they found. And I do also want to call out this study, like very clearly states that ADHD is genetic. And so they're not trying to say that like, oh, you could like pray the ADHD away or something like that.
Thank God.
And what they found is that ADHDers are less likely to be religious in the first place. So the exact quote is, indeed, studies have found that fewer children and adolescents with ADHD attend religious services on a regular basis compared to those without ADHD. And ADHD in childhood has been found to negatively correlate with the importance of organized religion in adult life. And we'll talk about this a little later. That isn't necessarily true for everyone with ADHD. We're not a monolith, but like, John, that was kind of similar to your experience as well. Like,
yeah.
And mine after going to Catholic school. So to get into the results, participants were these are all ADHDers with Judaism. Participants were told the purpose of the study was to explore difficulties in keeping boundaries. So ADHD itself was not mentioned in the recruiting process, and there were no a priori inclusion or exclusion criteria based on like whether or not you had ADHD in order to be able to enlist participants both with and without ADHD. So only those who reported their religious affiliation, gender, and ADHD status, and those who were over 16 years of age were ultimately selected. So they were trying to like reduce bias in their recruiting process by taking that approach.
I see. Okay, cool. So it wasn't like they were asking for religious people who have ADHD. It was just like, hey, who wants to participate in this? And then once they were like opted in, then they disclosed that, and then they chose the people that they wanted to participate.
Exactly. And people didn't even know it was a study about ADHD. They were just like, oh, this is a study about boundaries. Also, do you have ADHD? Do you happen to have ADHD? So that's how they recruited them.
So they didn't just like put out an ad for men in a autism men's magazine. That's not how they
This is a throwback to our last episode on the eyes test, where they developed an entire like autism criteria by recruiting 15 men who were autistic through a magazine article. And this process is still used today in a number of clinics to diagnose, even though it was only ever tested on 15 men. So if you want to hear more about that, listen to our eyes test episode.
So
because it's absolutely wild. So yeah, this is a better designed study than that one for sure.
Cool. So they weren't putting ads in like Jesus Weekly. Do you have ADHD?
Well, not Jesus Weekly, because this was a study on Judaism, so definitely not.
Okay, so yeah. This is how far I've strayed, Tara. I've completely forgotten which testament the hero was in.
we brainwiped it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
What was it? Maybe the Maccabees? I don't know what they're. Anyway, I don't know enough about Jewish religion. So before I offend somebody or embarrass myself, let's move on.
Hopefully in this podcast, we either offend everybody or nobody. I'm going for nobody, but backup plan, I guess, would be everybody.
Yeah,
We're trying to be equal here.
I'll go for everybody, go for nobody. That way, at least we'll play to both sides.
There you go. So what they found is that ADHD was less common in the religious communities, in the Jewish religious communities. And the researchers have two proposals to explain why. And I think they're both really solid. So the first proposal is higher religious attrition. This can be due to difficulties with self-regulation and self-control that make it harder to exist in a religious space, which I can totally agree with.
So that's like sitting still for a long time.
Focusing, yeah, like very much the trying to make people conform to particular behaviors that might be a lot harder to conform to when you're neurodivergent, and then having consequences when people can't do those behaviors. So they think that leads to attrition.
Yeah, reading dense religious texts and having to memorize things that might not be very easy to remember or like relevant in daily life today.
Right. Well, and we'll talk about a little bit why people who are neurodivergent may actually be deeply religious. And so one of those reasons is if it's your hyperfixation, right? Very easy to read all these like texts. There's a ton of lore, a lot to get into, but if it's not your special interest, this stuff is dense. And so it can be quite a lot to try and memorize. The other reason that they were thinking is that that there are more ADHDers in religious institutions than we think. Like it's present at a higher rate, but that their self-assessments are super biased. And so ADHD is underreported and underdiagnosed in religious communities due to pre-existing mental health stigmas. And so they recommended at some point that another researcher should do like a longitudinal tracking of changes in religious observance and belonging to account for this.
That one's interesting. I could see that could be for a couple of reasons, right? One could be maybe people aren't even like thinking it's ADHD. It's one of those things where like they're in a religious setting that in many ways like might punish deviant behavior, and they're having problems with impulse control and working memory, and they think there's something wrong with them, and instead of like getting a diagnosis and medication, they're just praying it away, right?
Right. They might be attributing it to like them being a sinner or something,
Yeah.
instead of realizing that it is actually ADHD that's causing this. It's not like a test from God, and you're like failing it. It's like just the way that you were born.
Yeah. I can imagine that another side of it is like it's also maybe we'll talk about this later on too. I can imagine some of the structure in place, and if you're very actively part of a religious community, might help with some of the more obvious symptoms of ADHD in a way that having like coaching or therapy or support might provide.
That's exactly right. They found that ADHDers who are religious were less likely to have antisocial behaviors than non-religious people, regardless of whether the secular group had ADHD or not. So like the people who were Jewish and ADHD had better social lives, basically. And they believe that that's because religious groups enforce stronger norms against antisocial behavior and allow less scope for deviance. And so it may not necessarily be the fact that these religious communities are embracing people with ADHD. In fact, there are studies that show the opposite, really. But it might be that they are sort of self-selecting for ADHDers who are already more pro-social and tend to be more on the social side and everything like that. And so that's who then remains within the community through adulthood. And so it may not necessarily be a buffer in and of itself as much as it is a filter.
I could see that. Yeah. It's something I've always admired about religious communities, and part of the reason like I think I wanted to participate to begin with was like I see the community, I see the way it brings people together, and that's a positive aspect of it. Provided church doesn't make your skin burn.
There is such a deep and profound loneliness at times to being neurodivergent, and that's probably worth a podcast episode in and of itself sometime.
Yeah.
But there's both not being included in a group in the first place, and then there's also being in a group. You can be in a large room of friends and feel totally alone because you don't feel like anyone sees you or understands you. And I think the second one can almost be more painful than the first, where you are like, wow, I have people and they don't get me. And so, yeah, like I think to sort of fantasize for me about that, like religiosity and being able to show up every Sunday, do something you feel like is good, right? Like you're like, it's almost like a self-care, right? Like, wow, I've done something good. I'm staying close to my faith. I'm listening to like a sermon or something like that. And then to have this like built-in community, it sounds incredible on paper, right?
Yeah.
Assuming that community accepts you.
Right. God, that what you were saying about like the profound, deep loneliness, it's something I feel so deeply. I can relate to so hard. Like it chokes me up. It's like that's so much of my life. I have so many just heartbreakingly sad songs about that I've written. And like it's because being part of the community feels good. And there's been a lot of studies too that have shown that being active in a community and having friends that you can rely on, that you can grow old with, help your overall mental health, help your overall physical health and wellness over time.
That is one of the biggest determining factors of your longevity. Like older people who do not have a community don't tend to live as long. Like that is such a big factor. And it is so much harder for us not only to find people who will accept us, but people who also understand us. And yeah, like I think that profound loneliness is so much a part of the neurodivergent experience.
Yeah. So if people with ADHD can benefit from this, it sounds like it's only coming from if the religious group accepts them to begin with, right?
Yeah. So they noted religious observance rather than religious belonging drives most of the moderating effects of religiosity, while religious belonging rather than religious observance drives negative attitudes towards ADHD. So to kind of put that in other words, if you're Jewish or any other religion, right? This was a study on Judaism. Being religious, being Jewish and like observing the Jewish faith didn't really have any sort of negative effects. And that actually was tremendously helpful for people to moderate some of those ADHD symptoms. But trying to be a part of the Jewish community drove negative attitudes that had negative outcomes because there was a lot of judgment.
Sure.
And this is not to like flame Judaism, right? Like this was true in other studies we read throughout many other religions. It's just this sort of concept of many religions having this sort of criteria about how you should behave, like what is good and proper. And ADHDers failing to live up to it. And then that creates like a downward spiral. It's and then you ultimately feel more alone, right? Because it's like I have this community, they're supposed to like love me unconditionally, they're supposed to care about me, and I just can't get it right. I can't live up to their expectations. Like I'm not going to say that's like the worst thing in the world, but like it's hard to imagine situations that are like a lot more painful when you're talking about like social groups, right? Like that's got to be up there.
And it's extraordinarily relatable, right? It's like if you're not doing it right and you're constantly being reprimanded, I think that leads to a lot of like the ADHD trauma, right? Like why we feel like we don't measure up, like why I think depression is such a big comorbidity, like why loneliness it exists, right? Because you can feel it in church and you can feel it definitely in the workplace, right? I think that's where like one of the biggest areas where the problematic side of ADHD shows up is when you're like in school or at work and you're trying to get stuff done and either you don't know why or you do know why and it's just very difficult to manage. So all right, so like you find the right church, you find the right people, and it sounds like the community aspect of it has a lot of benefits.
Yeah. So they basically found that ADHDers could potentially benefit a lot from being part of a religion, but if and only if their religious group tries to accommodate the ADHD and reduce the stigma. And so like examples of accommodation would be religiously permitted abbreviated prayer. So like not making you sit through a full service or sermon or anything like that, and like allowing people to have a bit of a truncated time. You know, we've talked about workplace accommodations on I think various episodes before. Just kind of the same thing. Like if you belong to a church that is open to accommodations and open to you and how you're going to show up, and holds more that belief that, you know, like that God made you this way, or like your religious deity like made you this way, and that you sorry that like God made you this way, or your religious deity made you this way, then you might actually benefit quite a lot from religion. And so it's really about finding the right religion and the right, local community of religion where they are going to be more accepting of you. And then, this could actually be super helpful.
That's promising. That's promising. That's an optimistic take. But I've read the Bible, Tara. I know Old Testament God, he is pretty punishing, right? So why, what does that say about like, how people with ADHD like might fit into or reject that religion?
That was something that I struggled with as well, because I grew up Catholic. We went to church like every Sunday. We weren't like super strict Catholic or anything like that. And when I went to Catholic school for the first time in ninth grade and like read the Old Testament, I really had trouble reconciling some of the things that I felt were so inhumane that they claimed that God did in the Bible. And maybe Catholics feel that it was otherwise justified, or maybe some people think that like the Bible got mistranslated or something like that. I don't know. But for me personally, that stuff was just so hard to read. And that was a little bit of a turning point for me in my own religious journey, where I started to like really get turned off of Catholicism. And so that's one big reason. Like we should talk about all the different reasons why people with ADHD might not be religious, but like I think that sort of sense of justice it makes it sometimes hard to read about a God who is more punitive than like we might tend to be in our daily lives, because the strong sense of justice is a very common neurodivergent trait. And just to clear up what that means, because you hear it a lot on TikTok, strong sense of justice does not mean that you like have a moral high ground or that you are like a better person than other people. All it means is that you tend to have some sort of personal moral code, and you follow it very strictly, like very rigidly. And so I think because we all have our own strong sense of justice within our own definitions of like what makes you a good and bad person, the odds of that lining up exactly with what you read in a religious text are probably a little bit lower. And so when we see something that doesn't exactly align with our own personal beliefs, we're probably going to take it a lot harder than someone who does not have a strong sense of justice.
But I get that. I think a lot of ways that looks like is we have a moral compass, and so we're always trying to find things that align to that. And when things don't align to it, it's frustrating or confusing, especially when it feels like for no reason or out of nowhere or just because. Right? I think a lot of times, like, I'm happy to play by the rules as long as I know why the rules are there. Right. If I don't understand, if someone's just telling me to do something, I don't understand why, I'm going to find a different way to do something just because that's how my brain is wired.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So I think you're touching on two things there, right? It's our personal moral compass, like we said, might not necessarily align with that of a religious text. But you also touched on like, I think we struggle with rules a little bit because, I think many people with ADHD and autism, our favorite question is why. It's hard to follow a rule that you don't necessarily understand. And I think part of that is because sometimes when you have a more challenging time reading social situations, it's a lot harder when you're just given a rule versus if you understand the intent and like the reasoning behind how a rule came about. Because we need to be able to do those calculations in real time. Like, okay, this was the rule, but this was the spirit of the rule. And so I need to figure out for myself how to like behave in this situation based on the spirit of the rule. And so because religions tend to have, a list of rules, and it doesn't necessarily always fully explain why a particular thing is good or bad, or maybe we also don't agree with the spirit of the rule. That makes it hard to like follow all of those rules. So I guess to give an example of that, I almost failed my first communion. So for those that aren't Catholic, first communion is basically this rite of passage where there are a number of what are called sacraments. And God, I hope I'm not butchering it because I haven't been Catholic since freshman year, since Catholic school. So it's been a couple, many years. But anyway, so I apologize if there are Catholic listeners and I'm like totally butchering this. I'm so sorry. But there are these sacraments, right? And you're supposed to hit these particular life milestones in order to be admitted into heaven. So that's why when Catholic babies are born, they're baptized very quickly, because the idea is that if a baby died before baptism, they would be stuck in purgatory forever. They wouldn't get to go to heaven. And so you're supposed to meet all these milestones up until the point in which you die. So First Communion is another one of those. That's where you line up and you get the little piece of bread and you drink the wine, and then you go back to your seat. And so before, I want to say it was age 13. I want to say that that's the right age. Before that point in time, you're not allowed to receive the bread, which is called the host, and then the wine that's been like blessed. And so you learn about all the things, you do the stuff, and then you're allowed to like take it. But in that process, they do these sort of like little interviews to make sure that you like are following the religion. And so they ask me like, okay, what is the bread? And you're supposed to say the body of Christ. But I was like, yeah, it's representative of the body of Christ, but it's bread. And they were like, no, it is the body of Christ. And I was like, yeah, like a metaphor. And they were like, no, it's literally the body of Christ. And and this is an example, like being autistic, I took it very literally, because I'm like, that's not physically possible. You didn't dig up his body. He doesn't have enough skin to feed people for thousands of years unless it like literally regenerates when you like cut off a slice. And also, I don't want to eat him. Like,
it's so weird. It's so weird.
So I took it very literally, but the idea behind it is that it starts off as bread, and then the priest blesses it in this like little ceremony, and then it like transforms into the literal body of Christ, like right after the blessing.
Magical.
And so, but I like seriously almost failed my first communion because I was like, no, like it's bread.
Your high precision mind is struggling with that. Yeah. No, I get it. I struggle with like, how could there just be like one God that watches everything? And, there's so many, and kind of what you were saying a minute ago, like there's so much suffering. But there's
the concept of him being omnipotent, omniscient, and benevolent all at the same time.
Yeah. It's wild, but, so you ate the magical bread skin. But
I was too scared to drink the wine because I was underage. So I actually
that makes sense.
I never took the wine, and so I don't think that I like officially did first communion. I faked it.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of things there are an assault on the senses, right? Because there's especially people that have any kind of sensory processing issues. There's a lot going on. It sounds really uncomfortable.
Oh gosh. Yeah. No, church is so uncomfortable. They used to do incense, right? And that's like where they like burn something, and it creates this like very heavily scented smoke, and they'd go and swing it around like they had this little like gold thing on a chain where they'd be burning it. They'd swing it through the aisles, and I used to like burn my nose. Like the smell of it hurt so bad. I used to hate going on days where they were burning incense because it was just so much. And I remember like the church that we used to go to, there's a lower section and an upper section, and just kind of being in there. And I think maybe this is a little bit more of an autism thing. I know we said this was going to be the ADHD episode and the we're straying, but the study was on ADHD, and then we have studies on autism for the next episode. But anyway, you just kind of have this persistent sense of being watched for a lot of us with ADHD, or for a lot of us with autism. Not in like oh, there's like a stalker spying on me way, but just sort of like, I think this is part of masking. Like you just sort of always feel like, is someone looking at me? Am I doing the right thing with my face? Am I doing the right thing with my body? Am I like, and in a church, there's an awful lot of people kind of like judging your behavior. And so I always used to like when the bottom section would be full and we would have to go into the upper part in like the rafters and sit up there because there were just fewer people. And so I felt like I wasn't being watched all the time and kind of like scrutinized, because it was really hard to like sit still. Like the pews hurt, like the wooden benches that you have to sit on hurt a lot. I didn't know at the time that I was hypermobile. And so now I know that's, again, a very common trait for ADHDers, like the hypermobility. And a lot of us don't even know that we have it. You know, I would recommend you guys check out videos on hypermobility. We'll make one at some point too. And yeah, just like sitting on a hard surface really, really hurts. And you have to then go and kneel on these like little, it's like a padded thing, like while they're praying. So it's, it's a lot of like sit, stand, kneel, sit, stand, kneel. And that used to hurt my knees because, again, I didn't realize that my joints are like a little bit more squishy than other people's joints. And so like that's hypermobility. And so that really hurts. And I would be kind of squirmy, like I'd have to shift back and forth, not only because of ADHD, but also because of the hypermobility, because it was like hurting my knees, so I was like kind of always like in motion. And so that felt like I was doing something wrong in church.
Yeah, you gotta, it's like, it's the whole idea of you've gotta be punished. You have to feel pain in order to be redeemed, right? Or like, it's the whole idea of like suffering to get the reward.
Yeah. And there's a really good article on Attitude Magazine where people just have quotes about religion and their ADHD. And so I wanted to call out this one. One of the readers said, "I find a lot of peace in the notion that God loves and works through imperfect people. My medical practice is devoted exclusively to patients with ADHD. Here in the Bible Belt, there are many people who attend church but feel guilty because their minds wander during the service. They can't remember the sermon, people's names, or the meetings that they promised to attend." And so I think there's, like we were talking about earlier, very much this social component of like, did I follow all of these sort of unspoken social rules correctly? And like, am I going to need to feel guilty about it? Because if there's a space where you shouldn't forget it, it's your church friends, right? Like that's from the context of being religious, that's like the most important thing, right? And so feeling like you're falling short because you have memory issues and can't focus during the sermons, like that's going to hit hard.
Yeah, it's the church is, it's a place where it's very preachy, and they're very judgmental, which is interesting. Like the judgment. I found so many communities that religious communities that are. It seems like for a place that's meant to be accepting, I feel like a lot of the community aspects come with accepting and letting anybody in, right? But there's a lot of judgment, I think, that comes along with those environments, because you have to like follow the rules and play along. People who are LGBTQIA plus are not going to really fit in there, and there's a huge overlap between neurodivergence.
Yeah, we very much know, if particularly if you're autistic, you are far more likely to be queer in some way, and we know that. And so from a very like practical standpoint, there are probably a lot of neurodivergent people who get pushed out simply because of that connection. And again, that's like not to say that like every religion or even every practitioner of a particular religion is anti-gay. It's just the way in which some of the local communities practice it. And so that is going to push people out, particularly neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's other differences too. So there's another thing that's like, this is a little bit maybe like nitpicky on my part, but it feels a little bit illustrative to me. So there are several churches who have rejected the idea of like gluten-free crackers, like bread, like the host that I was talking about, the Eucharist. And we know that ADHDers and autistic people are significantly more likely to have allergies than the general population. Like especially ADHD is very deeply tied with like allergies and asthma and those types of issues. And autistic people are way more likely to have a more severe version of the MTHFR gene mutation, which makes it very difficult to process folic acid. And folic acid is fortified in most countries in the world. They add it to all wheat products, like all gluten containing products. They spray it directly on the wheat. And it's because folic acid is very, very effective at preventing basically like birth defects. And so they want to make sure that like pregnant women get enough folic acid. But unfortunately, a lot of autistic people cannot process folic acid in that particular synthetic form. And so it can like build up in your body and actually cause some like very severe impacts on your life. So like autism and a number of other conditions are very much associated with that very severe MTHFR mutation that makes it hard to process. It's like gluten is a problem for a lot of neurodivergent people for various reasons. So we're, I would just say we're more gluten sensitive than like your average sample of humans. But in January 2025, the Church of England said that using wine free from alcohol, which also, alcohol allergies, that's a thing, would be contrary to church law because the results of fermentation would be nullified and alternative wafers made of ingredients such as rice, potato flour, and tapioca could not be considered bread because of the lack of wheat. And then the Catholic Church had a similar take in 2017 because they said Jesus ate wheat bread and drank grape wine.
Wow. So rigid. They're so rigid. And it kind of goes back to what you're saying, like the acceptance can come from when there are accommodations, but it sounds like the church is struggling with some of these accommodations.
That to me feels like a very basic accommodation to offer just from the pure. I mean, even, take all of it out of the picture. Like celiac is a thing and it's a very severe thing. Their retort was basically like, don't worry about it. Like we can bless you in other ways. So you don't need to have anything. Like they would rather you do like a special blessing instead of taking a non-wheat wafer. But I don't know. Like I think if I was in that situation, I would be like, are you sure? Like I would potentially like force myself to eat the Eucharist, even if I was having negative health impacts, because it'd be like, are you sure I'm like saved? Like,
yeah. Well, I mean,
kind of a big deal.
Yeah. But I guess like coming from the place that like wants to, pray for your health and like pray it away and use magical bread. Yeah. I could see, them holding on to that. I mean, having said that, like I'm obviously like being a little, poking fun at it a little bit. On the other side of this, I think it's kind of cool is that there's rituals. Doing rituals that have been around for like hundreds of thousands of years. I visited I went to Italy on my honeymoon and went to some of the Duomos there, and I saw them doing the incense thing, and it was cool to see. Like that stuff it's moving.
Yeah, if it doesn't burn your nose, it's very cool.
yeah. Well, but like that's what I'm saying. Like it was moving because I've never seen that. I don't go there very often, right?
Yeah.
So like for somebody that doesn't participate in that stuff, it was kind of cool to see from the outside that they have these rituals that go on for all this time. Kind of a cool thing. But if you want people to participate daily or weekly at least, right? If you want to make this part of a lifestyle, if it's really a lifestyle, then there's got to be ways to adapt it to make the lifestyle sustainable. And it sounds like this is an area where it's tough on the neurodivergent community.
Totally. And just to kind of close out this discussion, I wanted to pull in a couple quotes about how religions may not be as open-minded. Like this is very much a thing that a lot of people feel. So again, this is from the Attitude magazine article. Craig said, "My spiritual beliefs help me cope with my adult ADHD as well as my son's condition. I am a pharmacist and I am frustrated with faithful people's ignorance about ADHD. Many within the church consider the condition to be a spiritual problem. Most have no idea of the medical basis of the condition, so they rely on what their friends tell them. The church has to get educated about ADHD. Parishioners who have children with the condition are doing them a disservice by not having them treated." And so kind of to your point, like literally pray the ADHD away, that is kind of a perspective that people have. And then there was another study from 2013 that, just to summarize the results, found that compared to the rest of the population, evangelical Christians are less likely to view ADHD as a real disease and to believe children with ADHD should be treated with medication. Results also demonstrate that evangelicals are more likely to think doctors are over-medicating children with common behavior problems and to think that medication prevents families from working out the problems themselves. And so there are actual studies out there showing that like evangelical Christians don't believe in ADHD. And so that is kind of incompatible if you yourself have ADHD.
Well, and the fact that they want to let the families kind of resolve issues, right? I mean, if the church is a place for community, and and you have ADHD or not, like your home life might not always be the safest, right? Like other things that come along with neurodivergence could be like anger issues, especially if it's like undiagnosed and untreated. And so you might have situations that could be abusive, especially if you're deviating, right? And your parents are like have found structure there. That might not be the safest place. And so where else, where do you go at that point?
Well, and I think sort of from their perspective, they would say it's a failing of the parents to like discipline the children correctly. And so I don't even think that they're necessarily taking the perspective that like, not to say that everyone's like a monolith, right? But I think in general, there's not the perspective that like, this kid might not feel safe at home. I think it's literally like the parent needs to be more disciplinary and like discipline the ADHD away. So that's hard. And again, it's not at the individual level, right? Like this is sort of more of a institutional, systematic issue. And so that's the problem, right? Like if you can find an individual community that is more open-minded and a little bit more up-to-date on ADHD research, none of this might be a problem. Like the religion part might be totally fine. Yeah,
but for those of us that don't find that in church, I mean, we have trouble remembering the sermon. We can't remember the names. We can't sit still. Right? It's uncomfortable. It hurts to be in there. It's an assault on the senses. We're gay. They're telling us that being gay is bad. We have allergies, so we can't eat or drink the communion stuff. Okay, so there's a lot of things that kind of...
Yeah, it's going to be tough for us to look like the more devout and dedicated members of the community, right? Because there's so many factors working against us. And so you probably end up not getting the benefit of the doubt when you're in that type of situation.
Right. Okay. So then why... We mentioned this a little bit earlier, but some people with ADHD might really lean into religion.
Yeah, go the other way.
So in spite of all those things, where are we? What's it looking like for people that are like really getting into it?
Yeah. So I kind of have this theory that a lot of like ADHD hyperfixations and autistic special interests tend to, like you can have a special interest on anything, right? They tend to cluster on topics and things that have a very deep amount of lore and stuff to dig into. When you think about like the very stereotypical, like people who are into like trains and public transit, that's a lot of material to learn about, right? Like learning like the train schedules and maps and stuff like that. Because I think it engages our brain a lot to have like there's more to focus on when there's more to focus on, right? And religion certainly has centuries, eons worth of lore. And so I think it can be an excellent hyperfixation or special interest if if it chooses you, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you and I are like Disney nerds. We've talked about this a little before. Like, we're Disney, so like there's a lot of lore there, right? And like there's
So much lore.
so much interesting stuff at Disneyland because you've got the trains, you've got like the maps, you've got like all the characters, you've got the engineering marvels, you've got the the art, the design. It's all really cool. And churches are cool. I can appreciate like the
They're
churches.
beautiful. So many of them are beautiful.
Stained glass art is amazing.
Yeah.
And like even like the dedication and foresight to like, there's so many churches that are still around because they were built over like generations and still being, it's still being built. So like, that there's a lot of that stuff that goes into it. So I could see this being, for the people that really lean into it having a lot of that, special interest fodder.
I think that mosques are some of the most beautiful buildings on the planet because in Islam you're not supposed to depict the image of like Muhammad and of the prophets, and so that's why they tend towards geometric patterns because that is acceptable. And so that's why you don't see the same thing of the stained glass windows like you see in like Christianity and stuff. And yeah, I think that the like repeating geometric patterns, like the walls and stuff are so ornate and just gorgeous and hand carved centuries. Like I love architecture. And so from like an architectural perspective,
yeah.
And you see like the Moorish influences in like southern Spain when you had a lot of like Islamic people in southern Spain, like, oh my gosh, so beautiful. So there is a lot of from my interest, the architectural perspective, there's lots to dig into. But the texts themselves, for all of these religions, a ton of stuff to dig into and memorize, and there's a lot of structure and repetition, which I think is maybe more on the autism side. But that can be almost comforting. Like you're going to show up on this particular day. I don't know how every religion structures their sort of like sermons, but with Catholicism, there's this thing where you like repeat stuff back. Like the priest will like read some sections and you do that quietly, and then there's like a callback stuff. They'll say something and then you as a church are supposed to say it back or like say something in response. And a huge example that was on Easter, they would read out how Jesus was killed, and they would make you read the part of Pontius Pilate, like the guy who led the killing, which always made me feel deeply uncomfortable because I was like, I wouldn't kill him. Like, yeah. I don't want to kill people, but they'd like make you read it out loud. So that part, like, really, like, ugh, I hated Easter for that reason. Like, I'm like, I don't even want to say it out loud. Like, I don't. That feels like, oh God.
Yeah.
But anyway, like aside from Easter, that sort of callback structure, I think offers a lot of structure for people who like structure.
Yeah, and that's like there's like knowing what to expect. There's the structure, and I think we do know that like structure helps people with ADHD, right? So having a form of structure, whether you create it on your own or you like get help from a coach or you're reading about it, having a way to keep track of things can be really helpful. So I can see why people can get the benefit out of that. And also like, I can imagine a sense of comfort of like, it just takes the thinking out of it. If you don't have to think about things.
I am very envious of religious people because I know when I get older, that sense of like dying, to me, it's like, yeah, that this is it. Like I will cease to exist, and that's that. There's like this absolute finality to it. And so whether or not, heaven or afterlife or reincarnation or any of that is true, I am deeply envious of people who can, I guess, have that comfort and not sort of waste their time here on earth having fears about their life ending or what comes next. And so I think that there is a tremendous comfort and probably even benefits to believing that there is a cosmic plan and that there's not finality to it. I almost think that it's a tool for emotional regulation in that sense. So one of the quotes again from Attitude magazine from Susan, as a parent, I often pray in frustration, God, give me the words. Usually I'm looking for the right thing to say to my kids to connect with them, get them to hear me, or help them understand something. Asking for the words always helps. I also teach my children to pray out of gratitude and when they are frustrated or upset. It calms and centers them. And so kind of like feeling like not only there's this cosmic plan, but like that God can give you the tools and the words, whether or not it's God or whether or not that is a tool for yourself to access those skills, it forces you to take a beat, right? And get yourself calmed down and feel like you're not alone, right? Like it's like, I'm not alone right now. God is on my side. I can see how that would be so effective for helping with emotional dysregulation. You know, it's like even we've all had that moment, right? Everybody hates me. You know, nobody likes me. But to feel like God still loves you and he's still with you, like he's still your buddy. I don't know, maybe that's not the way that people look at it. But like God is still with you and you're still loved by someone. Like, wow, that feels powerful.
Well, the part of a plan, right? But
Yeah.
to go back to the parenting thing, that is something that is like deeply relatable for me right now. I've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and it's tough as a parent with ADHD who has kids that may or may not have ADHD and or autism. Like, it's tough. The meltdowns are hard. The like high energy at bedtime because they can't sleep, and I'm exhausted from raising them. But like from having the all day, and like I got my own issues with sleep. It's like it's tough, and so it'd be great to like to be able to pray and feel like any kind of help is coming. Having said that, the whole like you mentioned this a minute ago, take a pause and take a beat. The pausing to breathe really helps. That to me sounds a lot like mindfulness. And that's something that in those moments when my kids are losing it and it's late and like I'm completely dysregulated, and I'm short tempered, and I want to be a good parent. I don't want to, because I have a podcast about ADHD and I deeply understand ADHD and I have kids that are, they're going through things that are very familiar from my childhood, but I don't want to give them the same trauma. Like when I was a kid doing those things, I remember when everything feels like it's when just being like yourself and you don't know why you're behaving that way and it feels like a punishment, always like saying stop, no, don't. It just makes things worse. So the mindfulness thing is something that's like can be really helpful. So I've been trying to like teach the kids like, okay, let's just like calm down and breathe. And sometimes it takes a minute to get there, but like eventually get the kids to calm down.
So I totally agree with you that it's similar to mindfulness, but I also think it takes it a step further than mindfulness because religions have these themes that like struggle is holy and that it's with a purpose and that it will lead to like reward in the afterlife. And so like ADHD struggles and autistic struggles can almost be framed as a challenge or test from God. And I think that reduces the sense of helplessness. So not only is it making you take a beat, it's also almost saying like this challenge is for your own good. Like hopefully this comparison isn't like offensive, but to me, it almost feels like in the same way that like, you know how when you exercise, it's like your muscles hurt, but you're going to be better for it. It almost feels like it's taking the struggles and putting it in the same framing. Like, hey, this is a challenge, but God gave it to you because you can handle it. And you're sort of demonstrating a worthiness for an afterlife or for salvation by overcoming that struggle. And so it gives this like sort of profound sense of purpose to the struggle. And so to me, that's almost a step further than mindfulness in sort of having a buffering effect.
It's inspiring. it's inspiring, right?
Yeah.
Like to be able to have that feeling, like you are facing this challenge because you can handle it. Like that's an inspiring thing.
Tremendous amount of confidence, right? Like it's
Yeah.
like, I know I can handle it.
Right.
God
And
told me so.
yeah, right. And so like, God, if that's built into your belief system, that's cool. But that's a mantra you could take even if you don't have a belief system. Like, yeah, yeah. Next time my kids are, will probably be like when I'm done recording. I got to go back in there, and they're gonna miss me, and it's gonna be great. But they also are gonna have a meltdown. I'll just know that I've been given this challenge because I can handle it.
But for all these good things, it can also be taken too far. And OCD is a very common comorbidity for both ADHD and autism. We have an episode about OCD. In that episode, we didn't really get into religious scrupulosity that deeply. And something interesting, it's called moral scrupulosity OCD or like religious OCD. It isn't necessarily exclusive to people with a religion. It is actually quite common with people who are non-religious as well. And in that situation, it basically it sticks to whatever moral code or moral compass you have defined for yourself. And so what's going on there is you have some sort of code of how you're supposed to behave, be it from a religious text or from just your own set of beliefs that you've formed over time. And you have these constant obsessive thoughts that you are somehow violating those rules and that you have done something outside of that framework. And you may have not even done anything, but you will constantly have these recurring thoughts. Did I do this horrible thing? Did I sin? Or for someone who's non-religious, did I like run over someone with my car? Like, am I actually a murderer? Like stuff like that. Like you'll just have that loop in your head every day over and over, in an incredibly traumatizing way. Like OCD is a very serious condition with treatments. We want to be really clear here. You can get help if this feels familiar to you for OCD. There are therapies that specifically are designed to help with OCD. We recommend going to a therapist who specializes in OCD because it's not the easiest thing to work with, and so someone who has that background and that specialty is going to be able to get you a lot further. But there's stuff called exposure response prevention therapy, which is where they kind of expose you to the thing that causes you distress and you work your way up. So an example of how that might work for someone who's religious, they might feel that they are going to hell because they used God's name in vain. And so I'm not obviously not a therapist, I'm not a practitioner, but the way that they might start in an exposure response prevention therapy session is they might have you listen to your therapist say, "Oh my God," a number of times. And then they will have you maybe say, "Oh my God." And then they're going to give you emotional tools. Like they're not just sitting there torturing you in the office, right? Like they'll give you tools. How did that make you feel? Let's work on how to tolerate the distress that comes along with this. And they'll help build up your tolerance so it's not this like horrible, scary, awful, painful thing. And so that's why you want a good therapist, right? Is because they'll help you build up the tools so that it's not horrible.
Yeah, so there's definitely help. There's definitely resources, and I think this is another example. Like if you can find the community where you can get that support, and where you can get the resources that you need, it can help alleviate some of the pain or some of the torture that you might otherwise feel leaning into it. And I could just imagine like how a lot of like this scrupulous religious setting can draw on, especially if you're raised like this, how it can be challenging, it can be tough.
Play right into it. Yeah.
Play right into it. Right.
Something that's really interesting to me, this is also a super common form of OCD. So in Western secular countries, up to as many as a third of people who have OCD have scrupulosity symptoms, and about 5% of people with OCD are primarily religious scrupulosity. In some religious cultures and subcultures, religious symptoms are present for the majority of people who have OCD. But it is equally likely regardless of your religious type. So it's not like one religion is breeding scrupulosity OCD over another. It's the OCD is attaching itself to the religion or the moral code, not the other way around. Because it can even happen for someone who is non-religious. But the commonality across all of this, regardless of what your religion is, if you have this form of scrupulosity OCD, is just this compulsive self-shaming and self-criticism. It's going to present as like repeated self-defeating statements that are almost like an avoidant function of sitting with uncertainty. So like it's instead of sitting in that ambiguity, it's just this like, yeah, I suck. Yeah, I'm a piece of shit. Like, yeah, I don't deserve it. Like, because that is deterministic, right? Like there's no ambiguity there. So it's almost an avoidance of uncertainty. So while exchanging anxiety and uncertainty for shame and sadness doesn't seem like a good trade-off to most people, at least shame is certain. And so that is kind of the underpinning of that religious OCD.
Well, and if we come back to like the idea that like struggle is holy and with purpose, right? Then it's no surprise to me that would likely be higher numbers of neurodivergence and OCD and ADHD and autism all within a church setting that is just not discussed, not talked about, completely undiagnosed. Because now that we're talking about people lean into it, right? A lot of this stuff, some of this stuff sounds like just being a good member of the church, right? So a lot of the OCD stuff, and the idea that the pain and the struggle is all for something good, like I could see why it would go undetected.
Yeah, one could almost see how the church may frame it in a different way. Not in a way that they intend to harm, but just from like an outside observer. If you hear a fellow parishioner going like, I have been obsessively worrying about if I sinned last night, and you're like, wow, that like they go hard, they're hardcore. They really
Right.
are thinking about it.
It can be celebrated to some degree, right?
Right, because if you don't know that it's OCD and you don't know that it's harmful, like you could be like, they are just so devout, and so you could almost see it becoming this like self-fulfilling cycle where it's people almost respect you more for it, and then you're like, I'm an imposter, like I like it could definitely feed the shame cycle, and people could unknowingly play into it.
Yeah. Is this the end of our ADHD segment?
I think this is about all we had to say for ADHD, but we have arguably, I almost thought the autism studies were even more fascinating, and they are incredibly in depth. And so we have a lot to say about specifically the autism and religion studies. So be sure to tune in for that, because some of this was fascinating.
It definitely is, especially like looking at it from the academic lens and kind of looking at it objectively. I'm curious too to dig into some of other religions and other religions view these things.
Yeah, I will say the ADHD ones tended to focus on more of the like Western religions. The autism studies covered a much wider breadth, including we even get into stuff like alternative beliefs, like believing in like UFOs and like witchcraft and stuff like that. So these studies actually cover Yeah, these studies cover a much broader spectrum of religions than the ADHD one. So I'm really excited to share those with you.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Can't wait to hear those conversations. And yeah, thanks for listening. If you made it this far, be sure to like and subscribe. It definitely helps a small channel like ours. It helps us grow, and then we can do more in-depth stuff. And yeah, if you relate to any of this, good or bad, leave us a comment. Let us know how religion has impacted your experience with ADHD and autism, and